You're listening to Dateline Latin America, Tear Gas and Tango with
Joe Goldman, 37 years with ABC News, then with UPI, with The Village Voice, and many other.
And me, Daniel Schweimler, originally from London, formerly of the BBC, 19 years, and more recently with Al Jazeera English across Latin America.
They'll be sitting at a kitchen table in Buenos Aires talking about their journalistic adventures across the region, covering earthquakes, flooding and fires, talking to presidents, charlatans, sports stars and other newsmakers. In short, journalism and the state of the world.
Hi, Joe. So the 31st anniversary of the Armia bombing in Buenos Aires, in which 85 people were killed, passed last Friday the 18th. Very little coverage, and we covered it, but there was something you wanted to mention we didn't mention last week.
I think it's important for people to realize that one of the things that I really think, I can't believe I didn't mention it, there was the book and afterwards the TV series on Amazon Prime of Yossi. Yossi is a book written with a ex-federal police agent who literally was spying on the Jewish community for the federal police. It's an amazing book and it's an amazing series. I really urge anybody out there to check out the series on Amazon Prime. 2 seasons it's been on. And this is if there's anybody really investigating the Amia bombing, they would be investigating the federal police on the testimony of Yossi, this agent for the federal police who turned state evidence. The thing about Argentina is when you turn state evidence, the state turns against you.
I've read the book, fantastic book. I'll certainly give the series a look. In the meantime, things have been rolling here in Argentina. I was out last Thursday when doctors, medics across Argentina went on a 24-hour strike because of cuts to what was once a pretty decent public health system. The focus was on the Garrahan Hospital in Buenos Aires, which specializes a pediatric hospital, huge reputation in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Patients come from across South America, really, to have their children suffering from cancer treated there, as well as the doctors, nurses, other staff marching, plenty of families as well of the children who have been treated there, also marching in support. It's a hugely popular hospital, not just for its medical prowess, because the staff there are so popular. Everyone we spoke to, families, parents of children who have been treated, were saying they're just so humane. They're just such wonderful people. But what's happening is they're losing doctors at a massive rate. They can't afford to survive on the wages that they're being paid. Many are going into private health care, or they're going abroad where they're getting paid a much fairer wage. So the hospital is suffering. They don't have medicines. They don't have the equipment they should have. Yet, against all the odds, they continue to treat people. Another example of how Javier Milei's cuts to state spending, in his eyes, to control inflation, are having a very brutal effect on the population.
Yeah. And we should mention that he certainly has not cut the intelligence services budget. In fact, that's gone up, although we don't know exactly how much because it's hidden. Nobody knows. We also know that his own public relations group, led by Adorni, the media guy, had at last count 210 people working in his division. That is not budget cuts, let me tell you. And instead, they're cutting such important things as cancer treatment for children.
And the education system as well. I think it was back in February, university lecturers, teachers were marching. You and I were out at the pensioners demo one Wednesday when police let rip with tear gas against these aged people who were tottering out of harm's way, who have simply lost any benefits they had in buying their medicines. My own mother-in-law is 85, 86 years old, still working out in the Provincia de Buenos Aires, simply because she can't afford to retire because her medicines are now so much more expensive than they were before Milei came into office. Yeah. So we are increasingly seeing a two-tier system. Some people in Argentina doing extremely well. There's an interesting article in Bloomberg, in the financial newspaper, a couple of days ago about how travel abroad by Argentines is about 60, 70% higher than it was last year. Houses being sold, luxury cars being sold. So a percentage of the population are doing extremely well under his libertarian policies, cutting state spending, bringing inflation under control, and trying to enforce a very strong Argentine currency. But there's a big but there, of course.
Absolutely. I can say, as I go into my 40th year living, or at least centering my life in Buenos Aires or Argentina, I can say that the reasons why I love this place when I first came here and for many years was how science was really respected, medicine was respected, there were tremendous healthcare you had here, you had tremendous educational possibilities. That's being wiped out. If this keeps up, Daniel, I think Argentina might really be very similar to the rest of Latin America, where it really was a step above for a long time in academic terms, in just life terms.
I mean, Argentina is often talked about as the country in Latin America which has a large middle class. And these are the people that are being hit. It's got its shanty towns, it's certainly got its poverty, but not nearly as stark as we've seen in the one everyone says is the most successful economy in Latin America, Chile. And it certainly is successful for a certain percentage of the population, but massive poverty. Brazil, the same. I think it has one of the worst distribution rates of income distribution anywhere in the world. And it's noticeable when you go to Brazil.
Yeah.
Argentina increasingly going that way. Some luxury apartments around the Retiro railway station. Libertador is a very wide street that takes you into the center of Buenos Aires. Luxury flats, whole floors sometimes. People own in Retiro. And one of the best views you have is of the railway station, but also the huge shanty town or Villa Miseria, Villa 31, which is possibly certainly the biggest in Argentina, one of the biggest, I think, in Latin America.
I don't think it compares to some of the Brazilians in terms of numbers, but I remember reading it used to be down to about 18,000, and now it's up to 35,000. And if you go along the highway, you can see how it's branching out. People are moving into areas. This is all part of the railroad, the National Railroad territory, and people are literally squatting on that territory, building very treacherously built housing. And the area is really expanding. They tried to put in sewerage, they tried to put in electricity. They have put in electricity in probably about 2/3 of the shanty town. Poverty is just increasing, I would say, tremendously, even though some of the statistics don't exactly show it.
I mean, statistics are hard to get in the shanty town, mostly because there's very little access. There's no maps of the shanty towns. I mean, drones have allowed us, to get in and kind of view some of it, but nothing is official.
Yeah.
I don't know, you've no doubt have been into them several times, as have I. I mean, the one I mentioned, Villa 31, we were doing stories a few years ago about a women's football team there. Mujeres con pelotas, girls with balls, it was called. Very successful team in one of the local leagues. But they were having to fight very hard, to get a pitch, to get the footballs, to get the kit to play football with. But there is a structure, there is an infrastructure there. As you've mentioned, electricity
it's
and
changing a lot. I remember for many years to get in there filming with my film crew, I would go to the local rental place. The video rental place was the guy who was like the guy to go to get into the shanty town at Villa 31. So we would go there, hang out with him for a while, take some mate, and he would like make sure we got in and had the ability to just walk around and film. To say the least, there's no more video rental stores
No, no.
available.
Oh, but you don't go in without permission. I
No.
mean, nobody in their right mind does that. That's dangerous. And I've certainly done that in Brazil as well, in the favelas. We've been into the favelas, always with the permission of either a local priest who works in the favela or shanty town, or with somebody else who works there, or with the gangs, one way or the other. There are large narcotraficante gangs in there. They will give the okay. And you'll notice, well, I've certainly noticed when I've gone into the shanty towns, kids, boys, 13, 12, 13-year-olds on bicycles will start circulating, coming to investigate.
Yeah.
And they will report back to their seniors, who report back to someone else to say, look, the foreign film crews are here. And then when the time comes for us to go, they will tell you that's enough, and the message has come to us in the past, say, get out of here now, and you don't argue with that. So, and if you ask why, I remember on one occasion, somebody saying, just look up there, and pointing up into the, kind of one of the higher buildings, and there was a guy with a gun sitting in the window watching us. So you go in with permission. Sometimes it's in their interest. Sometimes people have done remarkable things in the shanty towns. But yeah, it's a sign of, again, this big two-tier society in Brazil, in Argentina. It's a whole other world.
In Peru also, I remember going into Villa El Salvador, which is a huge area in the south of Lima, where a lot of the people from the Sierra, the mountains, have come to try to make a living in the coastal area of Lima. And at one point, that area turned out, it was like 300,000 people living there. It was absolutely huge, but it was a tough area to go in and film in. But once again, you made sure you worked with, in that case, it was with the priests in Peru. And in Argentina also. I mean, one of the, our Pope was a person who walked through the shanty towns and was beloved. Bergoglio, when he was the Archbishop here, he was famous for going into the shanty towns and taking us in, taking journalists in.
But they're areas that most people, most Argentines have never been into the shanty towns. They will, Villa 31, the one we've mentioned, as you mentioned, there's a road that comes past it, elevated, so you can see right into the windows as you're driving past.
No,
you hope your car doesn't break down when you're on that road. It's fascinating. There's a little bit of voyeurism, perhaps. There's a danger sometimes of romanticizing these places. They are miserable. It's not to say that there isn't a sense of community. And I've interviewed people who have left the shanty town who said they go back because there's such a sense of community, of society, of community there, that people miss that when they go.
I don't want to only point to Latin America as a New Yorker. I remember you would drive through, I was born in the Bronx. I remember going back to my old neighborhood. You would drive on the highway. And also, if you broke down on that highway, the Major Deegan Expressway, you were in deep trouble, deep trouble.
Right.
So it's certainly not something only in Latin America, and it's something that I see increasing in the United States and certainly in Argentina. And there's also the situation where the city at one point on the major highway called the Belt Parkway, or no, it was the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, coming in from JFK Airport in New York, the mayor ordered the windows to be covered up because there were crack houses on most of the route coming in. So they actually covered it with like fake painted curtains or whatever, so people would not see that they were broken windows and crack houses and all that.
I went into a shanty town once in Lomas de Zamora on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, where, I mean, crack houses have been there for some time, but it's one of these stories that didn't really gain much traction until it left the shanty towns and middle class kids started taking crack and getting involved.
Yeah.
But on this occasion, we went into the shanty town because the mothers of kids who had become addicts, who are suffering the effects of crack cocaine, had reported the crack houses to the police, to the authorities. Nothing ever happened. So one evening they gathered together, marched on one of the crack houses, I don't know how many women, 50, 60 women, and pulled the house apart brick by brick with their bare hands. So that was the story. We went back a day, 2 days later, and filmed the area that they had destroyed. And the guys producing the crack cocaine, they weren't frightened of the police. They were possibly working with the police, but they ran for it. They had disappeared, left that neighborhood. So it was a little way of the community fighting back. And I've been to other ones. I think it was Visa 21 or 21, where the community had got together because, as I said before, there were no maps. The authorities don't go in and collect the rubbish. Ambulances dare not go in because they would park the ambulances and the medicines would be stolen or the wheels would disappear. So they had managed to raise the money for their own ambulance. And it was people who knew their way around, knew the community, and were respected as a result. And the community would hang around in the shed where the ambulance was kept. And then they would start bringing food in. And then they would start to say, well, this place is a bit dirty. There's litter everywhere. Let's start cleaning up. And they organized a community around the ambulances that were treating people within the shanty town. And they invited us in. We went in with their permission, got to ride in an ambulance in the back of the ambulance. Went up the stairs of an apartment block which didn't have any lifts, any elevators, to bring a patient down, and the ambulance was in perfect condition when we got back. But these are no-go areas. They're not mapped. They're difficult to register. The electricity, if there is any, is often stolen. The plumbing, they make it up as they go along. It's incredible places, but again, indicative of this two-tier society.
And one of the things that I fear that's happening in Argentina, that already happened in Brazil, especially in the teens in Brazil, and is certainly happening in a place like Ecuador, is when the state does not appear, when Javier Milei as president does not spend anything on everything from roads to healthcare, education, whatever. When that happens, a lot of times the narcotic industry, the big drug lords come in, they provide those services that the state does not provide. They become the power players in that area. That's happened tremendously in the Rio slums, in the shanty towns, the favelas. I'm worried that that's going to happen here in Argentina because the state has given up their work in those areas. The state's given up their work everywhere, basically. I mean, as you drive through the highways, you see that there are potholes that are just unbelievable. And it's part of the whole policy of, no, we're not going to do that. Everybody has to do that on their own.
And if not the drug gangs, the evangelical church will often fill that void, providing aftercare for people trying to get off of their addictions, and will provide jobs and counseling and food and some kind of respite from a difficult life.
In Argentina, we can say that the evangelical church has really never had a strong foothold here. Maybe getting bigger and bigger, but nothing like Brazil.
Nothing like Brazil, no.
And Chile with the Mormon church was very big at one point. I've not seen that yet. I think Argentina is still very Catholic, and the Catholic Church really has done a tremendous amount of work with the poor in the last couple of decades.
So we're looking at a situation in which, according to the Bloomberg article I mentioned, some people doing extremely well, others suffering, quite by a large percentage of the population, and only likely to get worse. I mean, purchasing power has diminished massively in Argentina in recent years. And you notice this, it's really difficult to get a grip on prices. You can get a decent bottle of wine still for 5,000-6,000 pesos, which is about $3.50. Fine. But we had a guy around, just moved into a new house. A guy came round to look at a metal door that needs repairing. Thought maybe $45, $50, $60. He's charging $500 to repair. But there are people in Argentina who can afford that. It's 2 months' wages for many people here. Yet workmen can wander around charging crazy prices because there are people who have got that kind of money.
Yeah.
Others are struggling to survive on, $50, $60 a week, something like that. So, and I lose track, as a resident of Argentina, I lose track of what is a decent price, what's not a decent price, because of this massive differential. People charging, speculating, whatever they like. You have to be on your toes the whole time.
Let's remember, Argentina has become one of the most expensive countries in the whole world. It's certainly in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, I go to New York so I can save money at this point. It is super duper expensive. I don't know how middle class and certainly don't know how the lower class makes it through the month here.
No.
I have no idea.
I mean, I went to Chile a couple of months ago for work. One of the first things I did when I got to a shopping mall in Chile was to buy a pair of trousers. $60, a fair price for a
Yeah.
half decent pair of trousers, simply because exactly the same pair of trousers in Argentina costs at least 4 times more. I mean, who is paying for that? Who has that kind of money? And it's, the reports are saying that while some Argentines are going abroad buying new cars, new houses, the restaurants and hotels are emptier than they've been for a long time.
I go to the local mall here near our lovely homes, Daniel, the Dot
mm,
Center. I actually go there to do my medical care. I go there to my insurances with Swiss Medical. They have a huge area of the mall. Why do they have that? Because most of the stores closed.
mm,
The mall itself, the stores, you go through there and there's like people who, there's nobody there.
no.
The people who work there are like sitting on, with their hands on their cheeks and like waiting for like maybe one person a
Yeah.
week.
And the people who go in, I went to investigate it myself the other day, and I went in with no intention to buy because I'd seen the prices just to look, and they all trying to run at you practically, say, "Can I help you? ¿Te puedo ayudar en algo?" Simply because they're so bored. I felt sorry for them. So I felt like I
It's
should buy something just to keep them busy. But no, it's a soulless place, and it's brand names. It's international brand names that you'd see in any shopping mall in the world. But yeah, it's a desolate place because no one can afford to shop there. So you do wonder how it
restaurants are
survives.
closing all
Mm.
over the place. I just don't understand. Tourism is completely dead from
Mm.
outside,
Yeah,
outside tourism
yeah.
coming in here. And even Argentines. I've heard people commenting on TV and radio here about the lack of tourism in places like Mar del Plata. This is the winter holiday.
Mm.
Usually those places are filled. Iguazu, the falls at Iguazu, nobody's going
No.
there except maybe rich Brazilians or something.
Because it's cheaper to go abroad. And while you're
Yeah,
abroad, you'll do as we just said, you'll buy the things that you need to buy, that pair of trousers, that pair of shoes that you haven't been able to buy in Argentina. So you'll double it up as a shopping trip. So
my wife's relatives
mm,
in Mendoza are zooming over to Chile
mm,
to do things like they put the worst tires that they have on, go over there and change all the tires, bring them back here. The cost of a tire in Argentina is, I think, the most expensive anywhere in the
mm.
world.
At the same time, you've got Javier Milei, who's often praised the former British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, said he models himself to a large extent on her policies, which were basically sell everything off and then reap the benefits, which affected a privileged few. As a reciprocal measure, the current leader of the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom, Kemi Badenoch, has an article today was saying that she admired her template for her future was Javier Milei. She wants his kind of policies to apply to the UK. Basically, withdraw the state from as many facets of daily life as possible, which is education, which is health, which is mending the roads, public broadcasting, which really doesn't exist here in any way, shape, or form. But it's basically shut everything down. There is no cultural ministry here. There is no women's ministry, which we used to have under the previous government.
Yeah.
So basically, increasingly, people are left to fend for themselves. And if you end up on the streets, yeah, you've got the shanty towns as your, not a very attractive safety net. There is nothing else for you to look after. Public health system, as we've mentioned, declining rapidly. So yeah, the effects are noticeable, but there are beneficiaries. There are a percentage doing very well.
I think one of the things that people outside the country think that because inflation is down here, this is a successful government.
Hmm.
One thing to look at with inflation is the National Statistic Institute is still using some of the same really basically all of the same parameters that it used 20, 25 years ago, which means that they're not taking into account certain things that have been very, very glaring under Milei. For example, the cost of utilities, the cost of medical care, the cost of private education. Those costs have skyrocketed and they represent almost nothing in the formula used by the Institute. So when you have water prices have gone up 350% since Milei is in, electric bills have gone up almost 400% in that time. Gas at the gas stations has gone up about 500%, which of course has things like any kind of product that needs transport here has surged in price. My medical insurance was about 360 when Mr. Millet came in. It's about 900, and that's in dollars. We're talking dollar inflation of 250%. The inflation here is not measured correctly, and it's really, it really shows in a government like this where the utility costs, for example, there's no regulation, so they've just gone skyrocketing.
I'm going to speak ill now of some of our visiting journalistic colleagues who will come in from the financial magazines, newspapers, on a company account, all expenses paid, and will fly into Buenos Aires, maybe go and have coffee with an economist in Recoleta, go and have a fine steak meal in Puerto Madero, the former dock area of Buenos Aires, at an expensive restaurant, and pay much higher than you would with New York or London prices, and talk to politicians and analysts, and can wander through the center of the city and everything, and see the new cars on sale, and then maybe take a trip out to somewhere like Iguazu, where there'd be very few people, as you've mentioned, and come away thinking the Malays policies are working.
Yeah.
It's easily done, and I've seen it many, many times. And they will quote statistics at you. But in a country where a large number of people live in shanty towns, where you don't get statistics, where very few people pay all the tax that they should pay, where figures are fiddled all the time, you do not get a true representation of what's actually going on in the country, unless, of course, you get a better idea if you go wandering around and try to see with your own eyes. I mean, and living here, we get that advantage sometimes. Yes. I had last week to go and visit a hospital outside of Buenos Aires, a place called La Matanza, and had to go through an area of the city I'd never been through before on a bus, San Martin. I was astounded by how desolate it was. It was like something from a dystopian movie. Ruined buildings, derelict warehouses, smashed windows, litter everywhere. It looked horrendous. It was frightening. I was just glad that the bus whizzed through at the speed it whizzed through to the place I was visiting on the other side. The contrast between this place, where tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in what's known as the Conurbano, the conurbation around Buenos Aires,
would be the third largest province in Argentina of the 23 provinces. It has over 2 million people. It's absolutely huge.
And it's where the bulk of the support for the previous government, the Peronist government of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, came from, because it's so densely populated. Yeah. But compared to the Argentina, the Buenos Aires that foreign visitors would see, it's beyond comparison.
Yeah.
And these aren't shanty towns. These are where struggling people will live. This is where the effects of these policies are being felt. These are people that need the public health system, need public education, and these are the people that are suffering. So you go out of the main areas, where people visit, and you will see a whole other Argentina. But I'm not sure Milei cares that much, because these people many of them didn't vote for him. So the trade unions are strong. So when people are marching in the center of Buenos Aires, this is where they come from quite often. They're bust in, have these big, kitchens, these communal kitchens, where they get to eat a decent meal for the first time that week. It's again a two-tier society.
You mentioned the journalists who come in here, like a lot of the financial journalists. I would call them parachute journalists who just are in and out as quick as they can, get a very superficial look at what's going on here. As you and I have been here for decades, we know this place. We really understand it. And we see the deterioration. And it's really, really sad. We see what's going on with medical care. You were talking about the hospital, the Garayan, and it's true of all the hospitals here. There was a sense, and I hearken back to the beginning of the COVID pandemic. At the beginning, I remember at 8 o'clock at night, the first month of the COVID pandemic, which was very well administered for the most part by the Argentine government. In the first month at 8 o'clock at night, people would go out of their houses and clap for the medical care, the ambulances, the people who were out there struggling against a tremendous pandemic. It was really a moving experience. That has been forgotten.
Yeah. And we've got midterm elections in 3 months in Argentina. I think that will be the big test, whether he's been in office since December 2023, whether the effects of his policies are being felt by enough people, or we'll see him, people believe in his project that he will bring inflation down, he will get the economy back on track. These cuts to public spending are absolutely necessary. We'll see whether people are buying into that, or whether those who voted for him back in 2023 are now going to desert him in huge numbers. That will obviously be the big test. So we'll be back to talk about that. Great, Joe. What should we talk about next week?
There's so much to talk about.
Always is. Always is.
We got football, but we'll keep that aside for now. I think Brazil is an interesting.
Well, I'm sure we'll mention football. You can't talk about Brazil without talking about football. But yeah, politics. Yeah,
it's gone down, but now their clubs are doing well. They did well in that strange tournament. But in general, God, Brazilian football is down at this point. People in Brazil are very down.
Yeah. And politics is interesting as always. I mean, it's a very divisive, divided politics. Lula of the left, Bolsonaro of the right, of the far right, supported by Donald Trump, who's butted in with the whole judicial system, which is trying to prosecute Bolsonaro, and Trump making threats against the whole nation of the Brazil, pretty much. So we'll talk about that.
It's interesting, the use of tariffs to decide judicial situations, but Trump and Bolsonaro are very special people, as is Milei here.
Okay, Joe, that's it for this week. Muchas gracias, obrigado. We'll talk again soon.
We'll talk again soon. Thanks, Daniel.